Good afternoon. I am Elliot Clark, President and CEO of HRO Today. We are pleased to invite you to the HRO Today educational webcast on strategic recruiting, mastering the new talent supply chain. Today's guest and presenter will be Darren Simons, Vice President and General Manager of Recruitment Process Outsourcing at SourceRight Solutions. Today's presentation will be covering a variety of topics, and I will be giving you a few instructions just as we begin. HRO Today puts on a number of these educational webcasts through the course of the year. We are also holding the HRO Today Forum in Las Vegas, Nevada, May 24th through the 26th to cover topics such as this. And we look forward, hopefully, to your attendance at the HRO Today Forum. Today's webcast featuring Darren will be lasting about 45 minutes with questions at the end, so hopefully you've settled in for a lot of great information. On your interface, you will see an area where you can ask questions. We will be taking questions at the end of the session. If you have technical problems, send a question through that interface, and the technical support that's on the line will be available to assist and answer those. But questions related to the content of the program we will be taking in a Q&A session afterwards, and there is a lot of great information here. Darren Simons is the Vice President and General Manager of Recruitment Process Outsourcing for SourceRight Solutions. He has direct responsibility for over 700 recruiting resources and all of the delivery and client relationships across a diverse portfolio of mid-market and Fortune 500 clients in several industry sectors, including technology, engineering, and manufacturing. SourceRight, as many of you know, was last year's top-rated company in the HRO Today RPO Baker's Dozen Customer Satisfaction Survey. So they are a company that has achieved greatly in their customer relationship management. So Darren has had a very good year for managing relationships. He's led staffing for a global BPO provider implementing cutting-edge recruitment technology and enabled hiring in excess of 20,000 people annually. He's had more than 10 years experience with SourceRight, in his previous tenure, and Darren has got expertise in RPO, VMS, MSP, BPO, and certainly all aspects of what he's going to talk about today. He's got an MBA with distinction from the Thunderbird School of Global Management, and that is the #1 ranked school in the world for global business. He's a Sigma Green Belt. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Darren Simons, who will begin talking about talent as a supply chain. We talk about supply chains in so many other aspects of business, but we don't think about people as we talk about, funnels and flows and process flow and maps and things like that. Do we think about it as a chain? So Darren, why don't you get us thinking about the supply chain of people?
Okay. Elliot, thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to share some information today. As we move through the presentation, a little background on SourceRight. Elliot, thank you for the mention of the #1 award. We're very proud of that, and over the last 3 years, we've had a great relationship in terms of winning the quality award for that period of time. We currently service, over 70 clients worldwide, have a little north of 700 recruitment resources, and clearly have the lion's share of RPO work in North America. As we move into the presentation today, we'll be taking a broader, holistic approach to the talent supply chain other than just a parochial RPO one. Well, we will speak about RPO and the impact of the new talent supply chain, but we will be taking a much broader view of that. hopefully this session will give you some tools and some frameworks and some thought-provoking ideas around how to look at your supply chain, how to maybe manage your supply chain, different ways to look at that. We'll bring in some outside research into this and have some time for Q&A. First, I want to thank everybody on the phone for joining. We have several hundred participants, I think, and this is just a wonderful time and session, so let's please make this interactive. As we think about really the state of the talent supply chain landscape today, we've seen just some incredible changes in the last 2 to 4 years, and that's been driven both by economic reasons, but by technology reasons, and also just around thinking in terms of how talent and labor is utilized from a more strategic workforce. As we look at those things through the presentation, we wanted to first take a view of the market and really understand, what the market looks like, how are we approaching the market. We've selected, a few data points from the last couple months of looking at what really the talent supply chain is happening. So IBM is stating that operating efficiency is still important. However, HR leaders are looking at business enablement or expansion over the year, and we're clearly seeing that in the talent supply chain, moving beyond the transaction and looking for business impact. Bill Guest and Tom Carroll, I think, quite clearly talk about the talent supply chain, really looking at service supply chains, looking at the management of a global talent supply chain, calling it a business imperative and not necessarily a public service. Some emerging workforce work that the SFN group has done is that large employers are looking at integrated talent supply chains and how to leverage that integration to get much different and better ways of thinking. As we look at effective talent management on the HR BPO side, Gartner is really looking at the HR work stream and the BPO engagements and looking at RPO and talent acquisition of those pieces as the #1 priority. As we look at recruiting trends, and I think this is an important one, looking at the vendors making progress in terms of talent supply chain integration, and they're specifically talking about technology enablement here and things along those lines. So as we look at the market, there's a lot of noise and buzz in terms of what is an integrated talent supply chain, how do we leverage it. I think the downturn in terms of market conditions and coming up for growth has companies looking for ways to leverage what that's going to look like. As we look at supply chain principles and look to apply them to talent acquisition, it's important that we kind of go over a few fundamentals there. Business demand in today's environment is incredibly volatile and variable. As we come out of the recovery into maybe more of an expansion mode, there's still an unpredictability of demand, and talent is being acquired in very spiky ways. Customer expectations are much higher than they were 2 to 4 years ago, demanding very much an on-demand service delivery and a just-in-time mentality. How does talent acquisition need to work to keep up with that? And if we borrow some tried and true methods from our supply chain cousins, we look at managing risks of non-supply, looking total cost of asset ownership, not just necessarily cost per hire, looking at segmenting asset classes, and in this case you can read asset classes in terms of talent today. Just-in-time inventory management on the supply chain side has a tremendous impact in terms of talent. How do we get the right skill to the right person today? And that's incredibly important.
Darren, one of the things I just want to mention as you're talking about this, one of the folks who's going to speak in Las Vegas is John Morbido. He's the Chief HR Officer and Executive Vice President at Cigna Corporation. And one of the reasons we asked him to speak is he was on the cover of HR Today last June as part of a roundtable of Chief HR Officers. And a lot of what he brought to that article philosophically was the need to manage HR to the people strategy to facilitate business strategy. He talked a lot around, it's not just about absenteeism. It's about how does absenteeism, affect sales? How does it affect customer satisfaction? How do you correlate those numbers, the people numbers, to business strategy? So when you talk about the talent supply chain facilitating business strategy, have you got some real data, or how do you philosophically pull this into business strategy?
Ellie, good question. I think when we look at that, and I'm going to maybe piggyback on a comment I made earlier, is we have to move the talent supply chain and talent acquisition as a function from just filling a requisition to enabling the business.
So is it time to fill, or is it because we reduced time to fill, we were able to get to our market faster, which really enabled X amount of revenue to come in, or profitability? Did we hire a better quality candidate, which resulted in some sort of quality and a business outcome? So in an integrated supply chain and a manufacturing concept, those are lockstep types of metrics that are happening, either with product quality or with certain types of manufacturing steps in a process. With talent, being a person, we have a much harder time of measuring that. So as our industry evolves, it's going to be much more into the situation of how are the functions and activities that we're performing in talent acquisition impacting and enabling the business not only to function but to be competitive. So, the trends that we see currently are, moving away from time to fill to say, okay, how is the enablement of the workforce, making the business better? And I want to make sure that answers your question.
Good point. And like I said, he's going to talk more about how he's done that with Cigna. And I think it's a really important point about the supply chain as being an enabler of business strategy.
Yeah, I think in the past, recruiting specifically has always been at the bottom rung of a ladder that's kind of swung with the needs of the business. Human capital clearly is going to be, a constrained asset going forward. And a lot of pushback we get today is, around the unemployment numbers and saying there's a lot of available talent. Well, there's not a lot of available skilled talent where you need them, when you need them. So businesses need to plan better, using that human capital asset as a precursor to enabling their business versus, oh yeah, we're going to make our business plan and then try and fill the jobs later. So, forecasting and demand is going to come into play. Metrics and measurements are going to come into play. All those things will come into play as we look at different, items to enable the business. It kind of leads to the next section of the slide here, Elliot, is really how do we really effectively use complementary sourcing channels, or, a term borrowed from supply chain, to create an integrated option for enabling the business. As we look at validating needs, too often we get point-of-sale types of needs. There's not an aggregation of demand and not an aggregation of fulfillment. When that happens, we get total visibility to things and we make strategic decisions. Need to open up systems for partners to be able to build what we call an advantage in competitive supply chain. And that means giving them a partnership capability, again, moving beyond the rec and improving both business processes but business outcomes in the business. Looking maybe a little bit, and we'll talk about this in a second, of where business is going, is optimizing cost and value relationships. So, there's been a pendulum of, cost reduction. Now we clearly see more right cost or correct cost and driving a value versus just cost reduction. I think the outcome here is really making sure that we take aggregation of supply and demand, optimize in the middle, get the right ROI on the talent, and really allow organizations to create, competitive advantage or leverage through that. One of the concepts we wanted to explore here is some research based from McKinsey around splintering of the talent supply chain. We've adapted some of this research, and we're looking at furthering this research, and we'll probably explore this a little bit more at the conference that Elliot mentioned. So McKinsey firmly believes that as supply chains evolve, they need to be splintered. In the past, they've been driven along very hierarchical types of monolithic structures to create high efficiencies and pretty steady demand. What McKinsey has found is that world has gone by. Speed and agility, flexibility do not lend themselves to this very hierarchical or monolithic type of supply chain. Splintering also really mitigates some global uncertainty risks. So when we're looking at volatile demand or volatile types of economic conditions, having multiple sets or segments or splinters of a supply chain is clearly an important part of things. In all paradigm, key decisions we call become economic because of forces beyond control. And what we mean by that is if you're making large investments overseas or you're making large capital investments that lock you in for 10 years, the world is changing in such that, that doesn't provide flexibility in what you need. So splintering, and we'll use the word splintering or segmenting in kind of common terminology today, really allows people to manage higher levels of complexity and hedge against uncertainty. As we look at how we apply that into the talent supply chain, we clearly can look at splintering our talent supply. And we can look at full-time workers. We can look at independent contractor workers. We can look at statement of work. We can look at contingent talent. As we segment into those different ways, we're performing work in all those different types of segments, and all of those become supply chain participants in delivering talent acquisition to an organization. In the past, all 4 of those supply chain segments, if you will, have both been managed, administered, and deployed independently. As we look at creating not necessarily a supply chain, and we're going to use a term going forward called talent supply network, and we believe much more in this networking concept or cloud concept than we do in a linear way of thinking these days, is how do you combine these different segments into something that's more powerful than its individual segments. As we look at new paradigms moving into that, we've created a structure called strategic talent optimization. We look at the aggregation of all talent demand from a client, and this graphic represents a client that has 4 business units that could have very different needs. One could be spiking up in demand, one could be going down in demand, we could have a product launch, we could have a structural transformation happening, but all of those things can be aggregated at a corporate level. Understanding what all those needs are and aggregating them will give us an ability to put a strategic lens against work. As we look at the work portion, how do we express work? How do we match up talent to work? We can then look at our talent supply chain, and we can look at contingent talent, internal talent, external talent, IC talent, and statement of work. Each of those supply chain splinters need to come together and perform both independently within their segment, but cooperatively to be able to express a talent supply in a global way. Let me take an example. If you have acquired a resource, how do you pick if you want them to be an independent contractor? Do you want them to be a contingent labor person? Do you want them to work under a statement of work? Too often in today's environment, that's being done point of sale at a hiring manager. What we're advocating is clearly moving up that decision process and elevating that to a level where strategic decisions can be made about our workforce as a whole. Let me give you another concept at a splintered supply chain. If you have an RPO engagement, could you have your RPO provider actually sourcing and leveraging talent for you? And once you bring the talent in, you make a choice on which way you steer it versus the talent itself or the requisition kind of dictating that. So we believe the strategic talent optimization model is a very strong model in which to not only leverage the value of aggregating the demand, but maximizing the value of the strategic talent supply chain. This is going to cause some pain for some organizations. This could cause some uncomfortableness, because if you look at those segments or those splinters, historically, they often are managed by different points within an organization. As an outsourcing organization that provide all these services, we can help bring those together, provide a holistic view to these, and provide better driven data, but also driving value within each individual segment. So just want to pause there for a second and see if there's any questions being generated by that. I think we have a number in the thing, but we'll take those probably at the Q&A, I have been told. If we look beyond just the talent supply chain, and I'm a little parochial in terms of RPO, looking at what does RPO need to do to adapt to this new talent supply chain. With the new paradigm, and I mentioned before, we've kind of left the stage, if you will, where RPO is just filling a rec. We're moving into kind of second generation, if you will. Some people call it third generation, but we'll call it stage 2. Initial adoption of RPO was clearly around process efficiencies, technology and cost avoidance, labor cost reduction and scalability. All those are what I would call model benefits. And if you go to an RPO and they're effectively producing for you, there will be a lot of savings generated. There will be a lot of value generated with those key drivers. We are what we believe in smack dab in the middle of a stage 2, which is really a business impact stage. And that business impact is really, okay, how is the talent supply chain, in this case RPO, producing a better quality of hires? Have we reduced attrition? Do we have business information around reporting that's going to allow us to be more strategic? Have we increased hiring manager satisfaction? So good numbers, how is it really impacting our business? How is it impacting effectiveness? As we look at strategic talent optimization, we view that as really the third maturity curve, if you will, around future state.
Well, this gets, I'm sorry, Darren.
Yeah, go ahead,
This gets all back to that whole issue of, once again, that HR supporting the business, getting into that strategic place where HR is actually part of the business strategy and enabling the business strategy and being able to do it. And this is really where I think that next evolution comes from. You know, going back to that platform slide you showed on the new paradigm of optimization on slide 14, is being able to do it in a measurable way, where you can build a different platform, you can create a different decision-making paradigm, and then you can measure impact in a way that comes back to the business. So that if you have a strategic impact on business outcomes, you can say, okay, by reducing, you know, turnover, by increasing tenure, by reducing time to fill, you have a better customer experience, you have better customer retention, you have higher sales, you have quicker inventory turns. Whatever that it is, that's what HR has to be able to say. The people strategy creates a business outcome. Everyone intuitively knows it, but not everyone intuitively measures it. And if the provider of the business, the people service, RPO, MSP, whatever it may be, can provide that measurement as part of their service bundle to say, okay, this is what we're doing for you on the people service, here's how it's affecting your business. Okay, if they can get that data, they can give the business, their client, to give them enough business data to give that measurement, that is an evolution to the next level of intertwinement with a client that I don't think we're seeing yet. But what you're talking about could actually get people there.
It definitely would, Elliot. I think, you know, one of the key things we have to work on is, you know, in the past, you know, especially as an outsourced provider, but just talent acquisition in general, has played the role of a manager creating a requisition and the recipient of that requisition. So as HR has transformed over the years and gone up the value chain for their function, if you will, as becoming strategic talent partners, they're consulting on how to express that demand, how to segment this work, and then we need to, you know, provide the fulfillment channel along which that's going to happen. So, you know, it comes along with HR having a seat at the table. I think that's, you know, increasingly been a transformation point over the last number of years in the industries that we work in, certainly. And certainly, you know, the outcome measurements that you're talking about are becoming more talked about both in RPO but also in talent acquisition in general. So I agree 100% with you.
Well, you know, and I'm going to irritate a bunch of people on the phone, but I've never been particularly bashful around HR people. The issue was never having a seat at the table. The issue for HR people, the issue was HR people could always get a seat at the table. They had to have something to say. Okay? And, you know, a lot of HR people bristle when I say that. You know, have something to say. Show up with something to say that the CEO will find compelling. Okay? And that's always been the issue. So when you can tell a CEO, we implemented this policy and it resulted in this, you know, impact to the bottom line, you know, or the top line, that gets their attention. For anyone who's just joined us, you are listening to the HR Today educational series. Today's speaker is Darren Simons from SourceRight Solutions. He's Vice President and General Manager. We're talking about strategic recruiting, mastering the new talent supply chain. I'm Elliot Clark. I'm the CEO of Shared Expertise. We are the publishers of HR Today and the producers of the RPO and MSP Summits. So, Darren, please continue. This is fascinating.
Thanks, Elliot. As we move kind of beyond kind of the stage and maturity curves, we look at really impact on RPO, again, being a little parochial, if I will. Old focus in the model was around cost savings, working hard, very tactical silos and pipelines, you know, vertically integrating to deliver efficiency. You know, hierarchies and layers, talent acquisition performed to really work on the requisition. The new paradigm, other than cost savings, is really cost efficiency. What's the correct cost? How do you optimize your costs either through outsourcing or partnering? It's working smart instead of hard. Again, it's creating networks instead of vertically created supply chains. Splintered or segmented to have agility within your supply chain and making sure agility is there with fit for purpose. And what we mean by fit for purpose is you can have multiple models existing within a current engagement or within a current client. You may need a high volume model, you may need a mid-market model, you may need an exec search model. You may have multiple models in terms of creating fit for purpose organizations within a delivery structure. So, Elliot, to your point, talent acquisition strategies are tailored to align and, more importantly, enable and then measure and deliver a communicated business strategy and outcome. So this is all happening in kind of Web 2.0 speed, if you will, amongst some pretty important market dynamics. RPO, in my opinion, in the last 18 months has had to pivot on its heel a little bit and shift out of that stage 1, move into stage 2 very quickly, and we'll see rapid acceleration through stage 2 into stage 3. One of the things that's creating complexity, if you will, in both RPO and the talent supply chain is really a lot of the technological changes that have happened, as well as a lot of the different recruiting techniques and way people interact. As we look at simple recruiting processes of the past, something was hey, I have a job opportunity, I have an application, I have a candidate. We kind of just fill that job. It was a one-to-one relationship. Things come out, and we fill them in a very linear way. Today's environment is much different. We're looking at multi-threaded recruiting processes. We're looking at multi-threaded workflow processes. How do you design your workflow? How do you tie together, different pieces of that talent supply chain? And it's become very, very complex. So in the old paradigm, it was, hey, very simple. All you got to do is create a lot of volume, and you can create efficiency. Today, you've got to have efficiency through agility and purpose-fit organizations to be able to make those complex processes work. To kind of underscore those things, again, we came from active candidates to moving into passive and strategic talent. We've done direct-to-hire headcount to on-demand and blended talent. Sourcing channels, which we're going to spend a little bit of time on, is really changed dramatically in terms of posting and job boards to social, digital media, and mobile. Results around, as Elliot mentioned, business impact. And then here's what's interesting to me is key process stakeholders have changed. It used to be just the talent acquisition function measured itself. They got changed on cost per hire. Today, as Elliot mentioned, they're at a seat at the table, and they're being held accountable to business outcomes. And it's not just HR, it's the executives, it's the candidates, and again, it's a network of people instead of a very linear process. So I mentioned we were going to talk a little bit about kind of new recruiting and the power of social media. There's a very dramatic cultural shift that's changing the way we find and keep the workforce working, and we have a small video that we're going to play here for you to talk a little bit about that. So if you can take a few minutes and kind of focus on this video, that would be great.
And we're just waiting for the video, I guess, to come up online.
Kelly, we have a little technical difficulty, or?
It seems to be taking a second for it to spool up. Clearly the social media is, once again, just an additional touch point, if you will.
So, Elliot, while we wait for that, what we can talk about is, no surprise to anybody, but clearly, social media has created a huge demand, not only in terms of process, but technology to be able to outcome. As we look at that,
Darren, I understand it is run.
Oh, great.
All right, so technology, and I hope you all enjoyed that video. Technology is one of those things that gives you the opportunity to be both gratified, and social media is certainly one of those things. It also gives you the opportunity to be annoyed at something other than your own family. We could not see the video playing, which is why Darren and I were confused at the beginning. Our interfaces don't allow us to see it while it's playing for the audience. I hope you all enjoyed it. I know it's a very cool piece of work. And Darren, clearly social media has changed and added a number of channels on how we can touch and communicate with organizations, how organizations can touch and communicate with employees, how we can get the word out, reduce the friction of information in the marketplace, and change the way employees feel about organizations that they are going to apply to with the frequency with which we can message. So, I think that's a tremendous tool that is now in the toolkit of potential employers.
Elliot, I agree. I think when we look at accessing that talent supply, we've got to keep a few things in mind. It's got to be, again, a multi-threaded approach. And what's happening today as we approach these things is you need to do it very consistently in a very systemic kind of way. What could have been a passive source before becomes an active viral source if treated, very, very carefully and with considerate thought. I think, your water cooler going viral is important as messaging and referral can be completely a viral experience. As we look at accessing that talent supply, we've taken a pretty active approach to that from a SourceRight standpoint, is really looking at multiple layers in which to attack it, either from a career site, candidate experience, social networking, doing active search work to go out and find these people, doing job board and aggregating, which is still happening, and I want to talk about that for a second because everyone says job boards are dead, but there's still a very primary good usage of them. Mobile has become an incredible, important platform for us, and I believe, personally, the most important one is building talent communities. And we find that job boards, do give us access to what we call active talent that allows us to network off that active talent to create positive communities. So as we look at a talent community and really creating a dynamic engagement platform for them, how do we create, touch, keep stickiness, if you will, for passive candidates within a community by keeping them engaged? So we are taking a multi-pronged approach to really create not only enhanced passive work, but more importantly, turning passive over into active recruitment through dynamic means. Elliot, I think you mentioned something that's very interesting. It's not just a pathway; it's an engagement mechanism. So it's interactive. It's two-way, it's three-way, it's network way, it's viral way. As we look at those things and mastering the complexity of that, everybody's working very hard to get there. So tool sets are important, but having aligned messaging in terms of company brand, having aligned messaging in terms of value proposition becomes that much more important. As we look at mastering that complexity, we've created really a recruitment marketing platform that will go after that. Really, attacking each of those different verticals, if you will, making sure it's tracked correctly, and making sure that we're actively pursuing the candidates in a very holistic way. As we look at the one piece of that is really that marketing perspective, but mastering the talent acquisition function is more than just attacking social media. We take a real three-layer approach here. One is really that recruitment marketing, which does give us access to active as well as passive people, but really a CRM approach in terms of being able to make sure that we're touching those people in a very meaningful way. So we take our recruitment marketing platform and manage our recruitment marketing efforts, really with the CRM platform that we then work into an ATS platform. I want to tie this back to a bit of discussion we had earlier around technology, around strategic talent optimization, as well as around talent acquisition. Today, SourceRight takes an approach of buying best-in-breed technology, integrating those things, and deploying them to the market, and staying ahead of the power curve from a technology perspective. We're very much pushing the ends of the envelope, if you will, of technology to be able to keep up with the morphing or evolving changes happening with passive candidates. As we do that, we have to be careful, and the careful part of that is making sure we are good stewards of our client's brand, making sure that as an ambassador we're clearly stating their value proposition, that all of the touch points, both technologically but also from a service point, create the proper brand. So you'll notice in our graphic that we chose to share today is that while we have these great tools, while we have these great touch points, those tools aren't good unless you have some things wrapping them together. Some integrated reporting and analytics to give the business information, Elliot, that you were talking about before is critical. Making sure that we take Six Sigma tools and design workflows, processes, and outcomes to get the most efficient process as we can, and clearly making sure that in the talent acquisition function we have top quartile talent delivering on that. So this is a topic we could spend all day on. We just wanted to make sure to touch on this to say this is a critical component across all of those supply chain splinters that have to be mastered to really maximize the effectiveness of the supply chain. As we're nearing kind of our time, I want to spend a few minutes only really on assessing the maturity of talent acquisition model. We want to spend a little time on this and talk through how can you assess it, how can you create a sample roadmap, and then leave 15 or 20 minutes, if you will, for some questions and answers for this piece. As we look at assessing the maturity of your talent acquisition model, we published a maturity model last year at the RPO Summit. We continue to evolve that with help of our clients and outside counsel, if you will, in terms of strategy advisors. And we look at kind of a 5-level maturity model. We look at this maturity model in terms of, things are chaotic, things are reactive, things are aligned, things are enhanced, or you get to transformation. We base a lot of our maturity model both on Gartner's work and a few other people's work, and have adapted that to the talent acquisition space. As we look at chaos, oftentimes as providers, but also stepping into a function or coming out of a recessionary period like we did, chaos can clearly be the state of talent acquisition. Disjointed, a lack of formalized processes, a lack of enabled technology, lack of lots of things that we all know as professionals need to be there. How do you put those things in place? Once those things are in place, how do you service the business? Are you still on a reactive footing? Do you go out and recruit only when you get a requisition, to simplify kind of that column? Is the technology there only to transmit a requisition? Moving into an aligned state, and this is where Elliot was alluding to before, how is really the recruitment and talent acquisition function enabling the business? So are there SLAs, KPIs that actually are tied to business outcomes? Is there formal strategies and alignments and objectives and goals that are happening there? Is the technology structure or platform able to deliver an aligned business strategy? Now, I had a question come up on the board that I just want to chat about briefly here is, how do you move from a point solution to a strategic talent optimization solution? And I think this is a good point to at least talk about that. A lot of legacy decisions have been made around IT infrastructures. We have to work with those legacy decisions. We either have to incrementally evolve them, or we can make transformational change happen. That's going to depend on company culture, around both risk tolerance as well as investment. We feel that rapid incrementalism is a good way to go. So as we look at investments and building off investments, we can tie together and create an STO or an advantage supply chain with existing technologies without having to do a complete swap and release, if you will. We do feel, however, to get to the end game, a couple things have to happen. We feel that some technology providers out in the marketplace are going to have to up their game a little bit in terms of being able to accommodate these different processes and networked supply chains. That's currently happening. We've seen progress by the major providers. However, as we look to the future, there's clearly work that needs to happen there. In the interim, bridging that gap is going to fall largely on reporting and analytics and better processes on either the provider or the internal talent acquisition function to move to the enhancement layer. What we advocate here in terms of assessing your model, and we have some further research on this. If anybody's interested, feel free to drop me a note, is doing a formalized assessment around each of your key components. And those key components can be things along the lines of where you're at in your technology, where you're at in your governance, where are you at in your actual sourcing capability. And you see some of that on the left-hand side around people, process, and technology. We would cut and slice and dice the different aspects of your organization, and those different aspects would be assessed into a maturity curve. Once that maturity curve is assessed, we can then come up with a sample roadmap. I'll give you a very brief sample roadmap to look at. Again, this has no bearing in terms of customer relationship, just some thoughts we have in a logical starting or moving point. Usually there's always a starting point. Some people start with an RPO deployment. Some people start with an MSP deployment. Some people take a bigger leap and go with both. But a starting point is some kind of advantage segment, and having optimization within that segment to be your cornerstone. Parochially, I would argue that RPO would be the clear, feeling from an advantage cornerstone to get there. And the reason I feel that way is if we look at direct talent, nothing's going to have a bigger impact on your business than direct talent. It's an emotional decision with your end users. It's a highly charged decision in terms of with your clients. So we feel, at least I do, very strongly that STO can be built off using RPO as a cornerstone, because you're really looking at the talent base itself. The MSP and VMS types of models have in the past largely focused on executing a solid transaction. And what I mean by that is enabling the transaction of a talent to be identified and onboarded. What MSPs and VMSs are quickly having to catch up to is how do you look at that talent on a more strategic way and apply more HR/talent acquisition principles into that chain. So I think Elliot had asked me a question earlier, how do you view your starting point there? We feel, a solid talent acquisition function needs to be enabled, whether it's in-sourced, co-sourced, or outsourced, to be able to leverage an STO model. MSP comes in quickly around that. Independent contractor work can be snapped on. Usually the toughest piece to integrate is statement of work types of activities because it's variability. When we look at kind of the phase one of scaling and delivering, it's really accommodating and making sure brand messaging and your sourcing strategies are aligned across multiple functions, and making sure not only your direct talent is pipelining, or what I call networking for talent for the future, but also your MSP VMS is creating pipeline of not only suppliers but contingent talent to get there. Moving into the next stage and kind of trying to hurry a little bit because I think we've got a few questions on board, have to kind of improve and operate through those different curves, making sure that you have incremental types of activities going on, whether you add on your MSP or your RPO to your initial engagement. But I think most importantly in the improve and operate phase and moving into the transform phase is how do you integrate the two? How can you take talent that's being acquired in your direct funnel, making sure it's available to your contingent funnel or your independent contractor funnel, and vice versa? At the improve, operate, and transform phase, you really have to do a lot of work on demand aggregation. You have to do a lot of work in terms of creating good taxonomies to express work. And then you have to have the platform in terms of being able to deliver exactly within the supply chain. Playing the what-if moment, once you have all those pieces in place and they're working well together, there's clearly an optimization and control period to get there. So I have a few minutes left here, which I want to sum up with, and then we'll have about, I believe, 10 minutes for questions. Went through a lot of good information pretty fast today, given the time constraints that we have. We feel very, very strongly that McKinsey's work around splintering of the supply chain or segmenting it in its purest manufacturing sense not only has applicability in the talent supply chain, it's clearly a roadmap for the future of what is happening. How do we look at those individual supply chains, if you will, optimize them not only within the segments, but create transformational power between those two segments? When we look at splintering them, they could be splintered in different ways based on different business needs. And I mentioned different models. You could have high-volume models. You could have high-end content models. You could have transactional models. And we feel very strongly that there is not a one-size-fits-all model for our client base, nor the industry in general. As we look at why that is, I believe Elliot hit the nail on the head, is how do we enable business goals and objectives? And, each business, each client, each industry could have very different business goals and objectives, and as we segment and splinter a supply chain, we have to take that into account. Aggregating talent demand is an important step in this, and it needs to happen in the form of a partnership with a client or within the talent acquisition function. We, as an industry, our clients have to up their game in terms of talent acquisition consulting, in terms of being able to consultatively not only work with hiring managers, but business unit leaders on doing workforce design and workforce deployment. I mentioned earlier the belief that RPO plays a very strong cornerstone role in terms of creating the value by driving speed and agility. Still strongly believe this, and that it can pave the way to a much faster implementation of an STO model, because you've tackled quite a few of those tougher challenges in outsourcing your talent acquisition function. As we look at mastering the complexity of the talent supply chain, I want to close with a few thoughts. The world is moving very, very fast. Communication is happening instantaneously. We need to take advantage of those two things, harness the power of that speed, harness the power of that technology into an advantage splintered supply chain. So, Elliot, we're coming up on the time I think we set to open for question and answers here. I think I hopefully hit that pretty close to where we were at, and wanted to make sure that we left some time for Q&A.
Absolutely, and Darren, really fascinating stuff and very well done. Folks, on your interface, there is a place where many of you have sent comments or put in some questions. If you have questions, please put them in now. We will try to get to as many of them as we can. So we'll give you a second or two. We have a few that we can get started with right away. And with that, let me take a moment and start that. And please, we're here to answer those, and we'll try to stay to the 1 hour time frame.
Elliot, I had one question there. Somebody asked if they can get a copy of the presentation. I have my email up on the desk. If you send me an email there, I can certainly work with you on getting you a copy of the deck that we have. We also have a white paper if you're interested in receiving that as well.
Also, this presentation, if you'd like to listen to it with other members of your organization, is going to be hosted. You can find it on the HRO Today website in the Thought Leadership Center. So come back to the HRO Today website, go to the Thought Leadership Center, and there will be a link where you can listen to it once again and hear it with all the context and commentary that Darren offered today. It'll be hosted for 6 months. So, if someone who you think would benefit from having heard this missed it today, they can still listen to it, online. The first question, Darren, most companies have, this is a loaded question, have systems to manage their supply chain, ERP software, such as SAP or Oracle, etc. But most HR systems, such as ours, they don't mention what they have, do not integrate the applicant tracking and vendor management software well. What do you think is the best supply chain management technology solution that you have seen or used?
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. That is a loaded question. I'm not sure who asked that, but would love to follow up and have a specific conversation on that. I think today, I mentioned this earlier, I don't think there's clearly a perfect solution today, and I think there's legacy starting points that we would need to work with. If a company's made a huge ERP investment, there's a reluctance to back out of that investment, and we're looking at more layering on top of that investment to make this work. I do think that there has been, some market improvement in this area with what I'll call purpose-built systems. So Taleo has started to invest in that recently and making some strides. PeopleClick as well. Fieldglass from the MSP side, I think, has made some tremendous strides in the last 6 months of layering in more talent acquisition function into that integrated platform. So I see some of the purpose-built applications, whether they started on the MSP side or started on the ATS side, moving to the middle to accommodate all those things. My personal opinion is I don't think anybody is there that I would say has hit a home run today. And I think, as I mentioned before, technology has some catching up to do with the models that we have today. But I do think that there are solutions available to be able to get to that end state by integrating discrete pieces until you can get a holistic business, a holistic technology there. A key form factor of that will be integrated reporting. Elliot, and we've done some work with the association on our RAP tool, which won Innovation of the Year last year. We purpose-built that tool specifically because of that gap in the marketplace, to make sure that we could take data out of different systems, roll it up, and make sure that we can create leverage between those multiple systems. So I do feel progress is being made. I think IDC is reporting progress is being made. However, I think that it's still a gap, and we'll need to evolve as the industry evolves to get to that point.
Okay, interesting point. And by the way, yes, you're right. That question did not come from someone from Taleo, Connexus, SuccessFactors, or Kronos. Just funny, or PeopleClick. Funny how that worked. Next question I won't mention, but it comes from a technology company whose business is always up and down, so I can certainly understand where this is coming from. But many companies have the same problem, and in fact, there are specific software solutions out there to help with this. It's not always possible or easy to move from requisition to business demand focus when your company's business is constantly changing and there's not a solid workforce plan. And in this case, this company's business is really based on inventory needs for the fiber optic, semiconductor, or computer marketplace, as many companies in the supply chain technology world are. So how do you recommend a recruitment organization shift to this model when they don't have solid business workforce plans and demographics on future hiring needs? How do they do it?
Yeah, great question, and I think probably representative of what a lot of us feel, because I often ask clients, what's your forecast? You get a forecast, you're lucky if it's 40% correct based on business volatility. A year hiring forecast usually isn't very good in today's environment. Really happy to get almost a quarterly view. My view of how to solve this business challenge, because it's a real one, is looking at incremental steps that you can take to get better. So, the end game would be to have, complete visibility and have transparency and have aligned workforce planning to a talent thing. Today is completely reactive. How do we set up some milestones in between those different spots to be able to get to the end game? Some different techniques that I've used and that we've used as an organization to help us get there is, what I'll call order of magnitude forecasting. So if we know the business historically has done something, if we know the business plan is to grow in these certain areas, we can extrapolate a little bit our best guess at what talent is going to look like. The challenge we have then is the old method of pipelining doesn't work, because you have to pipeline to very specific things. What we can do, given the technologies I showed with you around social media and recruitment marketing today, is create talent communities and create talent networks that allow us to go in and access those talent networks to speed up pipelining or to speed up actual recruitment and increase the quality of it. So to me, that would be a good first step that's actually available to us today through some of the social media tools and creating those communities for important skills. I think also, it's really, Elliot, a comment you made about HR as a seat at the table. We have to be able to bring value back to our business partners to force them into time and investing and taking guesses around this. So part of that is helping us help them and showing them the investments that we can make to either speed up their business in terms of hiring, make better quality hires, and also move down the path. So those are a couple of initial steps that I would advocate taking. I think we can move even further down that path once those initial steps are taken, showing some value, working with the business in terms of, hey, maybe we want to actually pipeline some talent or bring on some talent in a contingent model that we want to move over to a direct model. We might have our RPO provider actually recruit those people and put them into a virtual bench or put them into a virtual contingent labor pool and then have them on demand to access later. So it's really taking control of a couple of those functions. I think it's not an easy conversion to make, especially since you have cultures and systems that work on the rec and the point of sale per hire, if you will. It's really moving that upstream into a business discussion and working it as a change management issue.
Okay. Once again, if people have questions, by all means, get those in. We're still taking them, and let's see, we have another one that just popped up. No, this person must have seen me speak in New York last month, or maybe they did not, which means, I might be on to something. So this is a company that says 30% of our workers are contingent labor on any given day. And of those, 70% or more are projected for a tenure of at least 6 months. So here's a company, Darren, that has a lot of, about quarter to a third of their workforce on any given time period is contingent labor, and a lot of them are long-term contractors, but not on SOW. They're contingent. So what can the MSP vendor to help with talent management strategy for contingent workers, and what would that look like? So I think what they're asking is, if they've got somebody who's managing this, whether it's RPO or MSP, you mentioned that in there, how do you do something to engage those folks? And I'm going to assume when they say talent management strategy, because they didn't explain, I'm going to define the question to kind of engage or communicate or motivate that contingent labor pool during their tenure with the company to do as good a job as you can get from a contingent worker, because obviously you want that from any worker regardless of their status, full-time, contingent, SOW, IC, whatever it may be.
Yeah, good question. Let me dissect a little bit. I think choosing how to engage talent in which channel is kind of a multi-function decision, if you will. One is what's good for the company in terms of tenure. Is it a core function? Is it a repeatable function? Is it a function we believe we're going to build our future on, or think we can grow an ecosystem of talent? The other one is really how the talent itself wants to be engaged. So the way I would approach this, Elliot, is taking a couple different lenses. One, strategically look at the skill sets that are being engaged and see if it makes sense to have them as contingent or not. Look at the engagement second. Look at how the talent is being brought in, and why is it being brought in that way? Is it being brought in because a manager needs something really fast and they're going to contingent, where, hey, if you had the same kind of speed, would you actually hire that permanent? So I think there's some strategic questions you would need to ask there. The other approach I would take is, with the new generation type of workers here, a contract job of 6 months or a permanent job, and I'm using permanent in quotes here, of a year is a little bit synonymous. So it's going to depend a little bit on the company's ability to attract and retain talent that they want in their talent ecosystem, to have internal mobility. Do they have good movement from contingent talent to internal talent, and vice versa. So I would start at that strategic layer. From a tactical perspective, it comes down to educating at the point of sale with the manager in a consultative way. Why are you bringing on talent in this fashion? And can I offer you advice into which the best channel it would be? And it may be the best channel could be I've got access to talent this way, better, faster, cheaper, or it's just we're going to try all channels because it's a very hot skill. So I think it's a tough question to answer, Elliot, just in a short period of time that we have. We'd have to really sit down and kind of map out a few different factors on that.
Well, and in fact, we are out of time. So with that, let me, this is Elliot Clark. I'm the CEO of Shared Expertise, and we're the publishers of HRO Today and the producers of the RPO Summit and the MSP Summit, to be held in Las Vegas on May 24th to the 26th, where we will be talking about these kinds of topics, and hopefully you can get Darren to answer that question in more detail than he just did, because it's a complex question. And in fact, I know, Darren, you're going to be there, aren't you?
Yeah, we'll be there, absolutely taking part, and hopefully this content will be able to have a much broader discussion with the audience there.
Absolutely. Darren Simons is the VP and General Manager of Recruitment Process Outsourcing for SourceRight Solutions. Darren, I want to thank you for a fabulous presentation today. I want to thank everyone in the audience for your time and your attention. I hope you found today valuable, and we look forward to your continued interest. And once again, if you want to get the presentation, Darren's contact information is up on screen. You can send him an email, or you can return with members of your team to listen to this live on the HRO Today website. There'll be a link available for you in the Thought Leadership Center. Thank you, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Elliot.